Welcome everyone to the Artist Talk for Body Politic. Really excited that you're all here. I am Amanda Brown. I'm the director of 440 Gallery and the curator for the show. And I'm just very excited that we were able to bring it all together and bring these amazing artists here to share their work all together. So first and foremost, thank you to the artists for contributing your work to the show. And thank you for everybody else for being here. All right. So for those of you, I think everybody was here for the previous intro, but I'll say it again, that I am Amanda Brown. I'm the 440 Gallery Director and the curator for the show Body Politic. This show is very close to my heart, for one, because it was my first experience being a curator. There's me being very proud, like at the first day of school. And then also it is a show that kind of just, the idea for it kind of got stuck in my head. And a little bit of the background of that is, as an artist myself, most of my work is non-representational. I don't use figures in my work at all. It's very abstract. But especially with everything that is going on in the world is the vaguest way to say it. I was feeling a little bit like I wasn't being able to say enough with my work in itself. And so I was outside of me creating a whole new language and a whole new way of expressing myself. I thought there are so many people who are already doing this work, so many people who are already speaking to these points that I want to showcase. I want to create a show that allows all of that to come together, and kind of the uniting feature I was thinking throughout all of the intersections of the struggles that we're all going through, kind of comes down to the human body and what is politicized about the human body, whether or not how that body exists in the world or what that body does in the world. And so I wanted to invite artists to show in our space that exist in these marginalized bodies, and how do they approach the human figure, that one uniting element. How do they see it? How do they convey it? And how would that be? How would their approaches differ throughout the various intersections of identity that we have represented in the show? So obviously this is not all comprehensive. We are a small gallery, and there's a lot of things happening in the world, and a lot of ways that people are marginalized, a lot of intersecting identities that we can't fully represent with just a 10-person show. So I also want to pay respect to that it's important while we're looking through this to consider the people who are not represented here and the voices that aren't represented in this show, as we're also looking at the voices and the visuals of the people who are represented in the show. As the pieces came together, as I reached out to people to be a part of it, two kind of themes struck me, that there were similar approaches that I was seeing in both, in all of the work. And so there's kind of a mix of one group kind of showcased the form as in spaces of comfort and kind of hominess. It was creating this world building of a safe space around the figures. And then other ones, like the one we're seeing right now, kind of remove that exterior space and elevate the figures to almost put them on a pedestal and treat them almost as especially with this one, it has that halo effect and the glitter, and kind of treats it as otherworldly, almost deifying it. I thought that was really interesting to see how those two approaches, kind of like on opposite ends of the spectrum, like come together and kind of in a way do something similar. Like it's allowing each of these, like all of these figures, to kind of subvert conformity in a way, in a way that's safe, and in a way that allows them to be like their full authentic selves. So yeah, that is the short version of this. But I think as we like go through the individual pieces, you can kind of see like, so there's a little bit of overlap between the two groups as well. And some that like kind of bridge that gap, like Nia's work, which is like the collage pieces that we'll get to, that kind of does like a little bit of both. And Keisha's too, like it has that, like, there's obviously not a world space, but the figures themselves are very like unself-conscious and just kind of like being comfortable in their body and being playful, which kind of lets you know that they're in a space that they feel like they can be playful and be comfortable. So yeah, I'll stop chatting away and let us just look at some of the work before we talk to the artists. All right. If you could go back up to Amelia's work, please. We'll kick it off with them. I'm going to do a little intro for you, Amelia. So Amelia Galgon utilizes a variety of techniques when painting with watercolor to express unification of many disparate parts of their identity. Based in Brooklyn, But born in Philadelphia, their work finds peace and acceptance in the discomfort of embodying their own complexity. That's what we have in the press release. There's obviously way more to Amelia than that. But thank you so much for joining us today and for being a part of the show. To like get us started with questions, and just so everybody knows how this is going to go, I'll start asking questions of the artist, kind of like start a conversation with them. Feel free to drop some questions in the chat if you have them in the moment and don't want to forget them. Otherwise, at the end, we'll open up the floor for everybody to kind of ask questions of the artists. But trying to keep this like first part a little bit more contained. So if you have questions in your head, feel free to put them in the chat and we will get to them. So Amelia, I love how your figures are so unselfconscious and so comfortable within your pieces, but they're also very vulnerable, especially these two pieces that we like picked for the show, the like positioning of them. Obviously being in a nude in a bath is a vulnerable position. Doing yoga bending over is a vulnerable position, but there's this like comfort and safety in those. You can feel that they're not anxious about being that, even though in these cases that they're on display. What's your approach to conveying these figures, and what are you trying to communicate with these, like this unreserved openness that you have?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having me and for putting this together. And I'm really glad to have a chance to hear Demarcus talk too. I know I got a chance to like catch him at the end of the opening, but just very briefly to have a chat. But yeah, so I would say, just I guess as a starting off point, I am a sucker for conversations that have a lot of nuance in them. And I feel like when I approach a painting, I don't always know exactly where I'm going until after it's done and after I have that like moment of reflection. So in terms of like, what is my, what am I trying to communicate? It's complicated, but like, I mean, I could start with Uttanasana, which is the one on the previous slide, where I was kind of starting off with watercolor. And when I was exploring that medium from like home and lockdown, I really became like to have a personal relationship with the medium, and how just it's sort of like unmanageableness and how fluid it is, and how it is this really soft thing, but is difficult to control. I really liked that sort of like complexity and sort of like uninhibited nature that watercolor has. And I sort of like became kind of obsessed with using that as a way to express fluidity in terms of just like identity and self-expression, I suppose. And here I was certainly interested in like conveying the fluidity and this sort of like more, I guess, surrealness within the body itself, and have it be like a sharper contrast to how the watercolor is much more like managed and controlled in the exterior environment. And I was interested in that sort of juxtaposition. But it's funny because Small World, I was inspired to do this painting after looking at Keisha's work and her paintings, because she was using yoga as a means to like expressing self-care and like positioning her figures. And at the time, you know, this was like painted probably a year of just like sitting in my apartment, more than that. And I was sort of feeling really uninspired, uncreative. And I felt like, you know, I was using Keisha as a starting off point. It gave me a sort of like direction to go into in terms of like using my own space and my own body as a means of like re-expressing my creativity and kind of like reigniting that that love for, I guess, my own space, you know. And at the time, I was like more primarily focused with like painting, like getting images from other people and painting them in their space and kind of finding this like really, I don't know, kind of like virtual shared space moment to make me feel like I was like still connecting with people. But I guess at the end of the day, I sort of like wanted to recenter my focus back onto myself because of like my past history of like having a hard time even delving into like self-portraiture for years after like painting and like drawing portraits of my life. I feel like self-portraiture was a really vulnerable position to put myself in, and it was always kind of scary and still kind of is. But the more I do it, the more I can kind of like feel playful about it, I suppose. In a sense where like I can now, I like kind of see it as like a fun thing to do to paint myself in vulnerable positions, because it has this like nuancedness to like a lot of people view it as these bodies are comfortable, and I love that interpretation, but the nuancedness of me understanding all of the kind of like tumultuous thoughts that go through my head and all the self-doubt that goes through my head. You know, I know that like this painting came out of a place of like severe discomfort, not just in the space, but like yoga was a means of just like managing my body from not being in like chronic pain from sitting in my room all day. You know what I mean? So I kind of like that you can approach it in like multiple different ways. And I guess what I'm striving for in terms of communicating is like, yes, that fluidity and that celebration, but also just like, I guess, a authenticity in vulnerability. And I think the shift into doing the next painting vegetal, which I did this year, you know, a couple of months after I like did that series where I was like, I guess thinking about painting self-portraits as like a celebratory act. I feel like this one, even though people approach it as a bath, is a very kind of like almost could be a luxurious way to perform self-care and be like feeling comfortable and like all that goodness. I feel like in my head, baths have kind of also have that very like nuanced interpretation. And if you don't know me, you know, I guess it makes sense to know that like I'm 6'2", and a bath has never been a comfortable place to insert my body into. It's always this sort of like, I'm cramming myself into it. I'm thinking that it's going to be a nice thing to treat myself to, but then I'm sort of just like cramming myself into a space and like trying to relax, but it never happens. And I mean, there's also a lot of the conversation around vulnerability and specifically female bodies taking a bath. A lot of the images that I notice in movies, even comedies, but also a lot of my lens is inspired by like horror movies and stuff. A lot of the scenes of like a woman taking a bath is like either they're being observed or like something bad's about to happen. And that's sort of like a cultural understanding of like how we interpret observing women taking a bath, that it is this more voyeuristic and intrusive thing. So I guess I'm really, you know, I don't even know if I answered your question, but I guess I'm like always interested in having that sort of like nuanced and almost like up for interpretation point of view when it comes to like, is the viewer's gaze even welcome in the space? Oftentimes they're like, I don't have myself or other people acknowledge it. So then that's where we see the comfort in the figure, because there's no one to perform to, there's no one to really have to cater yourself around. But I think not all of those moments are meant for us to see all the time. And so, yeah, I guess all of that wrapped into one answer, you know?
Yeah, you definitely answered my question and then the one after it. So good job.
All right, cool.
Check. But I think that kind of like takes us to the next like question I wanted to have, which was how does like, and you touched on it, so it's a good segue, like how does gender and gender presentation inform how you choose to represent each of the figures in here? I think you said both of the ones that we have are self-portraits, right?
Yeah, both of them are self-portraits. And so like in terms of gender presentation, you know, I consider gender to mostly be a playful concept, like not something that I really put too much concern onto. Just in terms, when it comes to personal expression, I mainly just believe in agency and bodily autonomy, in terms of like each individual has the ability to make choices that deviate from our collective choices of how we kind of like put people into a box. And so, yeah, I mean, I guess the fluidity of the material does sort of play a role in, I guess, my gender expression more so than the figures themselves. I guess particularly like I have, not that this is like a set in stone thing, but I think how I relate to like my own womanhood in a way is through like connecting with other women and seeing that as like a valuable experience and like a shared experience, even if I don't really feel like personally that this is something that matters to me. But I feel like the sort of like relationship that I have to watercolor is sort of like connected to my womanhood in a very obscure way. I guess part of my feeling is that like it's such a like soft medium, you know, it's hard to like get a lot of like bold textures and like bold colors out of it. But it's also, you know, I guess this depends on like what circles I'm surrounded by in terms of like the art community. But I just feel like sometimes historically, you know, watercolor is kind of like labeled as this like rudimentary medium that like a skilled artist would one day evolve away from it. And I guess that kind of like, I don't know, after like learning oil and then revisiting watercolor and like seeing it as this, like really, like for me, it had a lot of impact. I guess really sort of like grounded me, but also made me, I guess, feel that relationship of like womanhood and like the struggles with like not being taken seriously or like not having full agency over like the, I guess, type of expressions that I'm allowed to have. I mean, I think my entire process in a way has become like an exploration of discussing like not just gender or sexuality, but like based on like cultural expectations, like who has access to not just like proper like healthcare or access to like resources, but also like who literally has access to like my body or to kind of dismiss my right to privacy or to dismiss my right to respectability. And I feel like particularly, I mean, a lot of identities could, I think kind of relate to that. It's not really just this one like thing that only queer women would experience, obviously, but I feel like even, you know, it wasn't too long ago where the act of me, you know, taking photos of myself nude on my phone or like using film photography and setting it to a shot. And if something were ever to happen to those photos, it's on me to like I did this one thing and now I don't deserve the privacy or the like the respect to like live a good life after that stuff were to come out. But I mean, our culture has grown up since then, obviously, but I think there's still a ways to go. And I think that like there's obviously that conversation going on in my head when I choose to like make these decisions in order to kind of like overwrite a lot of the messaging that I internalized about what I'm supposed to do and what I'm supposed to be. I think even just like painting myself in this way in particular is like a little bit, it's not a lot, but you know, I feel like for me to get there, it took a couple of years. And I feel like I'm still on that path to kind of like remembering that, you know, bodily autonomy is like a foundation to like all of my rights, and it should never have to be taken away just based on these type of like ways that I choose to present myself in my work, you know?
Yeah, definitely. I love how you put that. And I think to add to it a little bit, I think there's also this, even when you're going against what's expected, that like thought is still there. Like you're always, even if you're choosing to go against how people perceive you and how like you're expected to be seen, you're still like having that in your head, which can always be a little bit of a like mind mess up.
Yeah, totally. And I feel like it's a relatively new thing, like within the last 5 years, that I've heard less of that sort of dialogue. You know, I think particularly on the queer, like I have issues with rewriting that stuff on the queer end, like not like if someone's story isn't my own or it doesn't line up with my own expectations of like what my queerness means to me, you know, like I had too many experiences of people dismissing or invalidating or saying that it's like not even a real thing. And so it's a lot of work for me to like not continue that sort of like dialogue, you know what I mean? And that still exists even within me just like alone in my paintings, you know?
Yeah. That kind of goes to another question. Like you touched a little bit on it about like your own personal gaze and how you like treat the figures based on your own personal gaze. So if you have anything more to say to that, otherwise I can move to something a little bit less heavy and we can just talk about color.
Oh, color is so weighted. Yeah, I mean, like, I think, I think the only other thing that I would add about gaze is this sort of like, I guess, well, I have an interest now in primarily focusing on self-portraits so that I can have these conversations with myself. But I think I still do dabble in doing portraits of other people because it's still, I guess, a adjustment and a good exercise to feel like within the portrait that I'm giving the subject that sort of bodily autonomy as well. Because I feel like as an artist, it's a very powerful position to be in, to like choose how you would like to represent somebody. And I guess I don't necessarily want to take advantage of that privilege when it comes to painting other people. So in contrast, I feel like it allows, doing portraits of others is more like a celebratory act. I'm like celebrating the relationship or like what they've done for me, how I feel about them, how they made me feel. And yeah, the self-portraiture stuff is much more loaded and complex, but it gets to be because it's my narrative, you know. It doesn't have to be clear cut or anything like that.
Ooh, now I'm really interested to get to Demarcus as somebody who does mostly portraits of other people. It'll be interesting to hear the two points of view. But to jump over to color a little bit, both of these pieces and most of the work that I've seen from you has this like kind of like overall tint to it. It almost feels like you're wearing like glasses that have one hue. It kind of like, this one feels a little like rosy and warm, with the other one, and obviously has kind of that like green, like halogen overhead light vibe. So I'm just curious, like your approach to color overall, is there like symbolism with the color, like going back to the gaze within yourself? How does that color play into that? Or is it more about mood, or does the content of the piece kind of inform rather than something outside of that?
Yeah, so I've always loved color, but I never really tried to, well, and never until recently, I guess, felt the need to just sort of depict a kind of like natural lighting with maybe a little bit more saturation. A lot of my process starts with photography. And so I guess that's why there is this sort of like overtone of like of a certain range of color. And each painting has this sort of tint to it, which I really enjoy. And I think, you know, with Uttanasana, the earlier piece, I was like, it's kind of unintentional, but I kind of just really loved a warm palette. I used it a lot when I was painting other people more than I was painting self-portraits, because it was this sort of like inviting color. These kind of like oranges and rosy tones really would like draw me in. And I guess I always wanted to like, with vulnerability, also feel like it was an intimate space, like that someone would like could feel like they're invited in. And that's, I guess, how a lot of my paintings were toned, that sort of like warm bluish purpley shadows, sort of thing. Now I've taken a slightly different approach. I like took with New York City Crit Club, I took a color theory class with Eric Hibbett, who is like a master in color theory in my eyes anyway. And that sort of got me thinking of like including colors that like really look sort of like odd, or I guess like there's like a little bit more of a like disconnect with the types of colors that you would expect versus what's actually in the painting. And it certainly does exist within Uttanasana. But, you know, I started to use color as like, well, I guess I started to use film for inspiration for like how I would have color relationships. And I like a lot of the films that I like orient myself around are like horror movies. And so I think I like became obsessed with how those type of films would use color to express these sort of like raw, really intense emotions. And so because of that, I started to just like really personally identify with the color yellow. And that's why it's like a primary color that I used in vegetal. I guess I've like always had this sort of like disgust with yellow when I was younger. It was like my least favorite color. I like associated it with like so many like kind of like it was things that are stained or yellow, things that are like, I don't know, too bright. It hurts my eyes, you know, like I just like didn't like it. And I grew into it definitely, but like I guess I thought the kind of like different approach to viewing yellow as this like color that represents like caution and anxiety and decay to like really be a strong contrast to how I guess typically people would view yellow as this like kind of energetic, bright, joyous color, which I am also really in love with that nuanced interpretation. I feel like all colors have that sort of like, we have different associations with them that don't always match. And that's why I love color so much. But, you know, I think like yellow for me is a color that previously I didn't include a lot in my paintings. So I'm sort of using it, especially with my self-portraiture, to like really explore, I guess, my relationship to myself, to the color yellow, and sort of like redefining that, I guess, like distaste or like in discomfort with using it in my work, you know? So yeah.
We're gonna have to hang out and watch scary movies together because nobody.
Oh my God, please.
All right, plan. I'm holding you to that.
All right, I'll text you.
All right, well, that wraps up those questions. Obviously, if anybody has questions for Amelia, you can drop them in the chat and we'll come back to them at the end. But now we will move to Demarcus. I will read his little intro blurb. So Demarcus McGaughey, a Texas native and New York-based mixed media artist, passionately captures the beauty and strength and vibrancy of people of color. Behind his art resides a lifelong fascination with human psychology. As a result, in his art, he assumes a narrator role, telling heroic stories of his subjects' self-actualization and self-determination. Hi, Demarcus. So I like, you were one of like the first people I reached out to about this show, because this piece like popped up on my Instagram feed and I was like, whoa, okay. So the thing that got me about this piece right away was that like direct eye contact that this person has. It's like, it's direct, but it's also like soft. And so inviting in a way, because sometimes direct eye contact can be a little intimidating, but this is more of like the type of eye contact that like invites you in. And once I saw that the title was Iconic Vulnerability, I was very moved by it, especially going along with the like theme of this show and the idea that like vulnerability is so closely connected to like weakness when we think of like the patriarchy, and even more so for Black people who are like hyper masculinized thanks to white supremacy. So I would love to hear from you why you wanted to convey vulnerability this way. What about this says vulnerability to you, and why you wanted to touch on this subject?
Thank you for having me here. Thank you for everybody being here today and being in this exhibition, and just looking at all of the images, you know, on the slideshow. I was like, wow, a lot of the paintings are very like intimate, and they're very authentic and vulnerable, you know. So thank you for that. This particular image, you know, like growing up, I grew up in a neighborhood in Dallas, which is very just like, I don't know, like everybody kind of all thinks like the same way. And so definitely, being vulnerable was not something that we were kind of really taught. Being vulnerable was like a sign of weakness, whether it was asking for support, whether it was, I just don't know how to do it, or whether it was like dealing with your emotions, or even just maybe like situations within like your family. Those were like things that you just don't talk about, like what we call, though, like it was like things would go on that we would call like kitchen table talk. And so it's like it stays in the house. Like nobody knows what goes on in this house. Like, but even everything that went on in like our house or mentally, we just like never discussed it. You have to just kind of like deal with it. Like I wasn't raised to like have therapy. I wasn't raised to like, you know, pay attention to like mental health, So it was like you just kind of had to like figure it out. And it wasn't until maybe like a couple of years ago that I really realized that vulnerability really was powerful. And especially like, like in speaking engagements, or just being around people. What I realized is what I realized for me was like vulnerability was really kind of like a superpower. It was, it really has the ability to draw people into you, or into a situation. Um, and this particular piece, like even the whole piece itself is vulnerable. Like it's even vulnerable for me, as the artist. I was in a residency earlier this year in France, and this was actually the first piece that I created once I came back. And some of the feedback that I got was all the paintings that I painted over there. I did everything with the backgrounds and everything, but I didn't do the actual skin tones. So I'm used to like really taking my time, doing the skin and doing like a particular technique that I would normally do. And the feedback that I got was everything was always like an underpainting. But the feedback that I got was everyone was like, "Oh, I love it like that." And I was like, "Oh, it's not done. It's not complete." And I had heard it once before. I would do an underpainting, and I've heard like other people say to me, like, "Oh, I love it. Like I love like the rawness or the intimacy of it. Like it, draws me in more." And I was like, "Oh, no, 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 that's not it. Like I really want you to know like the skin tone of the person or the eye color of the person. I really wanted to just tell it to you. But what I wasn't doing was I wasn't leaving it up to the viewer's imagination." And so I decided to be vulnerable, and I decided only to do an underpainting, only using like 3 colors within the skin, using a Mars black, and then using 50% grayscale, like high fluid golden paint, and then like finishing off with like a carbon black. So those are the only 3 colors that I was using. But also, I am a certified life coach. So my paintings are like actually like love statements, to the figures. And this particular person, I was his life coach. And so also each painting is kind of like different life coaching sessions. So what you're really seeing is you're seeing like a visual representation of our like intimate conversations. And this particular figure, he was really big on mental health, like just the things that went on in his life, the way that he was raised, and the things that he's seen and experienced. I um, had never met like another like Black man that really wanted to take care of his mental health. You know, he was scared to like go to therapy. He had never been to therapy before. And so a lot of like I said, a lot of my paintings kind of come from that. I know it's like I would have a conversation with someone and I'm like, wow, I just really love your story. I love your experience. Do you mind if I, paint an image of you, to maybe like support someone else going through the same thing. And so I thought that vulnerability as a Black man was something that was very iconic that I had never, really seen. And when I go back home sometimes, like a lot of people are always saying like, wow, the things that I see you doing in New York, like it really motivates me, to be better or to do something. So like I said, with each of my paintings, there are like statements, so and kind of like teaching lessons as well too.
This kind of brings it back to what we were talking about with Amelia. So like you said, each of your figures are somebody and you're using it to celebrate them. Does the idea for the painting come first, or and do they pose, or is it like more informed by that like person themselves, like then you pose them for it? How do you approach each piece and how you want to like get started?
Actually, good question. Actually, the conversation comes first. It always starts, with the conversation. And it's always something that like sparks me, it's always some type of experience or some type of like just lesson within the conversation, or really a lot, I guess when I look at like a lot of my paintings, it's really when I hear the different experiences that my figures have went through, I don't know. It's just it just turned into something of like I have to paint that. I have to paint you. When I first started painting, I used to paint. I used to do a lot of pop art, and so I used to do this style where I would paint like a figure, but I would put like a animal head over their face. So I would use like a cartoon character, and the stories of my subjects were real, but I felt like I was kind of putting masks over their face. And then when the world just kind of like flipped upside down, and like when Black Lives Matter started, I felt like it was just important for me to actually show the figures. It was like, how can I turn like my friends and my associates, how can I turn them into like icons? How can I turn them into like rock stars instead of like hiding who they are? Like I thought it was just important for me to show who they were, and and it comes from like the conversation at first, but then the following step is like, yeah, we'll take a photograph of them, and then just through like photography or art directing, I'm also kind of life coaching doing the photo session at times too. So it's like I'm trying to get like different facial expressions. And this particular one, it just grabbed me. It just grabbed me, and it was just like, you see this Black man, and for me, obviously he looks powerful. Obviously like he's looking directly at you. And like you said, like for me, also the same thing. Like his eyes are a little bit like they're looking at you, but he's commanding you to like, hey, I see you. To the viewer, I see you. Like I'm asking that you see me. But with not doing the color in the skin, it's like I'm asking, the viewer to look deeper within my figures. Like the Black features are there, but look deeper within him and to see what it is that he's thinking, what it is that he's going through, like humanize him, and even like with his clothing, choosing that fabric, I wanted something that kind of showed kind of like royalty, like Black royalty, and the nimbus circle, the disc behind his head. I grew up in a very like religious home, and I saw a lot of like religious art, so I was always seeing like like baby Jesus with the golden disc behind his head, with Virgin Mary holding him, and then also going to like I studied that within art, but then again spending time in France, that's what I saw in the museums. And so I used to do just straight solid gold Nimbus circles, but this particular symbol kind of came because when I started using fabric, I noticed it within the fabric. And so I thought it was like a very ethnic African way to kind of do the same thing, so yeah.
Yeah, I love that. You kind of touched on my next question, which is I also grew up very religious home. So like to me, the halo was like front and center. So I'd love if you'd like talk a little bit more about that like symbolism and how, because some of your paintings have it, some of them don't.
Mm-hmm.
So what is your thought behind treating some of your figures as almost as like deities or saints, or like elevating them to like iconic status?
Okay.
Or iconograph
Yeah.
status, if we don't want to call them icons.
I mean, like, again, like that was just something that I think when I first started doing it, it was maybe just subconsciously because I used to see it all the time. I just did it. And I started off as a graphic designer too. And so I kind of used to always just kind of like put circles, behind people's heads. I don't know why. But when I started doing like the gold circles, I don't know, like originally when I first started doing that, it was a way for me to say that like that person was like anointed, or that person was not necessarily worthy, but like touched, like they were anointed. Like when I would think about like Basquiat, he would, put crowns, over his figures' heads, and I was trying to find my own language, you know, and at the time I really kind of didn't even realize that I was doing it. And I noticed a lot of other people were telling me like, oh, wow, that's your thing. And I was like, what's my thing? And they were like, oh, you put like the disc behind people's head, the gold disc. And I was like, oh, wow. And I really like laid out like all of my paintings, and I got to look at them. And I was like, oh, wow, I subconsciously did that, not really, it wasn't kind of really intentional, but it eventually became intentional. Because like, again, at first I was doing it with like cartoon characters, and I was doing it with like animal heads, human bodies. But when I really started to get into like Black figures, it became intentional because, again, it was a way for me to say kind of like the person was anointed. But then I can't think of it off the top of my head, but there was also like this Bible verse that I remember, something about like they are more precious than gold, and something like rich with honeycomb, something like that. Things like Proverbs or something like that. Can't quite remember, but it was also a way for me to subtly tell like my viewers that, like Black people are more precious than gold, and so like again with, the skin tone, it's like, here it is, you have this person who's like royalty, they're like Black royalty, more precious than gold, like look deeper within this person. And again, like the person sees you, and I'm asking for you to see the person. And also like with the gaze, I also remember like when I was younger, like going to museums, and then again, just spending time in France, I just always noticed whenever I saw like paintings and they were like Black people in paintings, they were never looking at the viewer. They were always looking at, someone else in the painting, or they always had their head turned like they didn't have permission to look, like to look away. And so in a lot of my paintings, you do see that my figures are looking at you, and they are like boldly, outrageously, powerfully, staring at you, so yeah, that's kind of where that kind of comes from. I think like in a lot of my paintings, you'll see like people of color, they have confidence. They're intimate, you know, um, they're vulnerable, but they ultimately have like self-assurance, and they have confidence.
I love that. in addition to the shimmery halo, you have a variety of like textures and other materials in there too. Like the cloth provides like a different moment for us to like look at. I didn't touch the painting, don't touch the paintings, but it feels like in your mind's eye that it feels different. Same thing with like the shiny like of the paint, and then like the matte like muted tone that you've used for the skin. There's like a lot of like playing back and forth with different materials that you have. And so I'm curious how your approach to this has come about. Like, when did you start using the fabric? And like, what makes you decide to like bring that into a piece versus like leave it out?
Good question, because I have one that doesn't have, that I'm working on now, and it doesn't have fabric on it. I think again, like I'm not quite sure how it started. I do remember the first painting where I applied fabric. I think I just kind of had, I don't know, I just had some, it was just the concept that there was an image that I used to sketch all the time in high school. There was like this face that I used to just draw all the time. And like, I can just do it like the back of my hand. And I gave this painting to my mom, and I remember I just kind of had some fabric for some reason. And I remember when I first started out, I used to use like a hot glue gun, because my mom was my original art teacher. And so I learned a lot of my creativity and crafts from her. And I remember I had this hot glue gun, and I was gluing it. And I liked the fact that it was kind of messy, but I remember someone saying like, oh, it looks like it's messy. And I was like, oh, I like that. You know, I love the texture of the glue, but I never did that style ever again until like years later. No, maybe to like maybe like last year or 2 years ago. And I did a painting where I just like went to a fabric store and again just bought a bunch. I don't know. I just bought a bunch of different fabrics, just exploring. And then I remember I posted this image of the painting. The painting went viral, and I never forget one lady said, "Oh, I see that we all get our fabric from the same place. We all go to Joann's Fabrics." And I was like, "Oh no, like I can't have that. I just can't have like, the same fabrics that everyone has." So then I started like intentionally like looking for different fabrics just to put into my pieces. I thought it was just a way to like, from a technical standpoint, I thought it was a way to like I like texture, like how you said that, you wanted to touch it. That's always been a big thing within my paintings. Like I've always used materials where I want people to want to touch the painting. Like, how did he do this? What did he do? What does it feel like? Because I like to play on your senses and your emotions, And when it became more intentional was my grandmother. My grandmother, she used to make us, my family used to make us quilts a lot. Like, from if there was a baby being born, if you got married, or if you graduated from high school, college, like she made you a quilt. Like I remember when I pledged in a fraternity, like she made me a quilt, with my fraternity colors. That was just her love language. And so she passed away last year. And when she passed away, I inherited all of her fabrics. And so like she just had like boxes and boxes of like fabrics. I mean, like old vintage stuff that I'm like, wow, like clearly nobody's gonna have this. And then there was even things like pillowcases that we used to sleep on, or maybe like old curtains and stuff like that. So all the fabrics that you're seeing in my paintings now, they're like very, very personal. And so they're her fabrics, So this particular one, like I just remember going through the box and I was just like, wow, like I didn't even think that she would have anything like this, And when I saw it, I just thought that it was just so masculine and so like just powerful, And in all of my paintings, like I just love colors. Like colors just, I sometimes also paint like, I think you were talking earlier to Amelia, like about, or you were saying about how this exhibition has kind of like twofold, like some have backgrounds and some don't. I normally paint backgrounds in some of my pieces, but I remember when I did this one, I wanted so much of the viewer to have like an imagination. Like even though you can't see where he is, I wanted you to be able to like feel where he was or to interpret what did you think he was. Like I wanted you to know like he was somewhere warm. Like when you look at it, I want to know like, could you pinpoint him in a particular place and like, could you smell the air? Could you like feel the heat on his skin? Could you hear like the people talking in the background? Like, could you put yourself exactly like where you thought that he was? So yeah, like, but again, like with all the fabrics, like I sometimes like I just have so much fabric, from her collection. Sometimes I may see something and I know exactly which piece that it's going for. And then sometimes I don't. Sometimes like as I'm painting, something in my mind is like, look for something in this particular color scheme or something like that. You can't really see it on this piece, but on all my pieces, I always do like a color blocking. Like the sides are always like a different color than the background of the painting. So this particular painting, like the sides of this canvas, they're turquoise as well too. So again, like when I saw this particular fabric, I just knew that it had to go with him. So.
Yeah, I also love, like, for anybody who hasn't seen the show yet, like where it is in the space, it's like Nia's piece is also in kind of like teals and kind of like a catty corner to you. So it like the like colors speak to each other. It's a very, very like color synergistic space in the front room, which I really dig.
I like it there too.
All right. Well, that takes us to the end of my questions. What we can do now is shut down the PowerPoint for a second and go to questions from everybody else. Feel free to just like unmute yourself and ask the artist. Also, artists, be sure you're looking in the chat because there's a lot of love there. So feel it. Yeah, any questions you have, go for it. Otherwise, I'll talk more because I'm awkward.
I don't have any questions, but maybe like statements. I loved a lot of what was said from both Amelia and Demarcus. Congrats
Thank you.
on
Thank
the exhibition.
Thank you.
I guess, I don't know, I'm weird. I like take notes when people talk. I found it particularly interesting when you were speaking about, Amelia, color, especially yellow. I don't know, the yellow, you were talking about yellow, it got to me. Because I mean, in the natural world, we associate yellow with the stains, with the waste. But then I really love the duplicity that you're kind of playing with, like the plant in the corner and like the top left corner of that painting. It was, yeah, I don't know, just like thinking about the relationship with yellow and green and yellow waste to growth, waste to plant. I also put a piece in the chat that work reminded me of Ophelia. I was like researching it while you were talking because I was reminded by it. and I didn't know that the model was also tall, and like I knew she was in a bathtub, but I didn't know that that was another discomfort too.
Yeah, I think I
Yeah, I
just
thought that
heard
was
that too, where like the model for Ophelia ended up sitting in the bath for as long as it took to paint the painting, and that was a really uncomfortable position to be in. I found that interesting as well.
yeah, I thought it related to a lot of what you were talking about. So yeah, and then with
Yeah.
Demarcus, um, I yeah, I really was touched by the just like talking about painting technique and underpainting as this way of like vulnerability, because I don't know, I guess when you think about paint, all it really is are these layers. Especially, at least when you're, especially if you're dealing with acrylic paint, it's just like layering on top of each other. But I am touched by your ability to kind of like peel back those layers and allow it to be like to just come forth. So
Thank
yeah,
you.
I have a lot to say. I'll just leave it there, but thank you for sharing.
Thank you. Trust me when I tell you, it was so. My friend Tracy, she's on here. Like we had many conversations about this. Trust me, it was so hard to do that because I think like my ego was like, I can paint, I can paint, I can paint. I can blend. And to do that, like I kind of I get it now. And I think where it really hit was when I went home to Texas. I actually have a self-portrait that I did that's at my parents' house. And it was my mom who was like, I think you should leave it alone. She was like, I think this is your thing. I think you should explore that. You always talk about finding your thing and finding your language. She was like, pause right here, you know. And when she said that, it was like, okay, like, I kind of get it. And I look at like all the new pieces that I've created versus the older pieces that I created, like even like this one, like you can tell like his you see the white, that's really just raw canvas. Like I didn't add any white paint or anything to it. It's just even on her, sorry, on hers, it's just white, and then you can see a little bit of like my sketches as well too, behind it. So thank you for that. Because when I tell you I was like just so nervous to do that, it took me a long time to even get to this point.
Um, I just wanted to say something. One of the things that I think about both of your work, first of all, I love both. I've loved seeing both of your work, and I really loved hearing about, what you had to say. So thank you very much. Um, I was just thinking that both of your pieces really, really touch upon vulnerability in such a beautiful way, and I feel like maybe that's really where truth comes from. It feels like when you dare to take the chance to be vulnerable or to share your vulnerability, um, well, in your artwork, I think it makes your work so much truer, and I really feel that from both of the work that you shared today. Um, So it makes me think about vulnerability as as you were saying, Demarcus, a very powerful tool. So thanks for highlighting that.
Yeah, I mean, Demarcus, I wanted to like, I guess also thank you for kind of expressing that sort of like really vulnerable practice of almost like what a moment might feel like you're dumbing down your capability as an artist. I feel like the two of us, especially in portraiture, because it's such a like you have to have a refined craft for it. I think because you want to like portray people accurately, and the two of us, I feel like, correct me if I'm wrong, but have a lot of confidence in like being able to like get the right skin tone or like really portray this person in like a really intimate way. And then like what does it how vulnerability is added when we start to like remove our ego from the painting, and what else are we bringing to it when like we allow things to sort of like be ambiguous now. I like feel like, you know, I've been looking at your work for a long time, and I've like gained a lot of confidence within myself and like my own practice by seeing what you're doing. And I'm so glad that like that you said all that and I got to hear about it.
Oh, thank you. Because you know I love your work. You already know that, you know.
Hi, Demarcus. It's Tracy. As you said, we've had a lot of discussions about work, and there's something that I never asked you. So now I'm going to put you on the spot and ask you in front of everyone. But it seems like many artists of color use their work to present the strife and the challenges. And your work always presents the opposite. This competence, the competent Black man, the elegant Black woman, this people that should have a halo over their head, that are revered. And I'm interested in why you chose that approach, whereas so many others are choosing the opposite.
That's a good question. That's a really good question. I'll say for me, growing up, the type of artwork like that we had in our house was always like slave art is what I called it, like slave portrayal, or like a group of Black people picking cotton. And I think that's, and I know why we have that cotton picking painting in our house is because my dad grew up picking cotton. You know, I always heard stories of, you know, it would always like remind us like, you know, I picked cotton so you wouldn't have to pick cotton, you know, stuff like that. And so I always heard those stories. But those were like the images that I always saw, like the images that we had in our home, and then like my grandparents and aunts and uncles. It was always like Black people in some type of like condition, you know, some type of like fighting for, you know, equality or something like that. Not to say that it was, you know, I'm not gonna not say like anything bad or anything like that, but it was just like, for me, it was depressing. Growing up, it depressed me. And I think, like I said, it's a very good question, because I remember when I consciously decided to create paintings of joy, you know, stories of joy, stories to like uplift people of color. Also stories to like teachable moments, but they were also kind of like real life narratives, real life experiences, real life stories, you know. And again, it was kind of like, when I think about my paintings, I think about like when I'm long gone, like someone is going to walk into a museum and they're going to be inspired because, you know, this Black man is looking at them with vulnerability, you know, and it's like, wow, he's strong in his power, and it's okay to be vulnerable. You know, it's okay to be confident. It's okay to be powerful. It's okay to look people in the eyes, you know? So yeah, I think I just want to just tell, you know, narratives of like triumph, you know? Hey, Larry.
All right. Any other questions that anyone has or comments? Just like heap praise on the artist is also a fair option.
Hey, Demarcus, this is Doji.
Yeah.
Just jumped in right when you were doing your part, and I missed Amelia's presentation. But congratulations, both and the gallery for this exhibition. I promised I was gonna come opening night, but I got stuck in Harlem. But yeah, I hope I will have a chance to come and see the exhibition before, the end. But as you know, I'm a big fan of your work. I love the new things that you're doing. And, I tell people, I say, listen, man, 2023 is going to be the year of Demarcus. So let's get it.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much. Thank you for always all the support, Doji. I appreciate it.
Yes, sir.
I'll also just heap praise. I rode by the gallery last night. I missed the opening. I wasn't able to go. And I stood out in front for a while. And it's such an amazing dynamic curation. It looks amazing. And I really loved getting to hear more about Amelia's work. And I know Demarcus's work really well, but I got some better insight. So just amazing job all around.
And I can't believe you made it. Like, you were just here. So thank you for being here, John.
I rushed home because I was like, I got to go to this. So I was a little bit late. I missed a little bit of Amelia's, but I made it.
Well, that's a good segue for me to kind of wrap up. There's still time to see the show. It's open for this week, and next week is the last week. We have reduced hours for the summer. So just a heads up if you're heading over there. So the gallery's open Thursdays and Fridays from 4 to 7, and Saturdays from 2 to 5, but closed on Sundays because everybody is like out living their lives and not wanting to hang out with me in the gallery. So,
but can I just interrupt for a second, Amanda?
Yeah.
If somebody couldn't make it those times, it's still possible to make an appointment. Is that right? Like if they wanted to.
For every week, but next week.
Okay.
Yes, because I will be gone unless I'll send them to you. You want to let them in?
I would be happy if that's the case. I'm around, so yes.
Yeah, we also have a number of works available on Artsy as well. So if you want to go that route, that is also an option. But yeah, I always like to kick it off with what's next as well. So Demarcus and Amelia, what do you guys have happening next in your worlds? Any shows coming up? Any plans, fun things that you want to share?
I don't know if I can say it. I have an exhibition. I'm in a group show next week in Manhattan. It's at the Central Park retail consignment store. It's I don't know the name of the street. What street it's on. I'm so sorry about that, but it's right by Central Park on the east side. Coming up next in 2023, I have 2 solo exhibitions. I'll have one in Harlem, and then I'll have one in Dallas. And one in Harlem in April 2023, and one in Dallas in October 2023.
Yeah, and things are in the works in terms of shows, but nothing that I can speak of right now. I am in Vermont at Vermont Studio Center right now in my space. I got here on Sunday, and it's been a long time coming in terms of coming to this residency. I applied back in 2020, so I'm finally here, and now I have the time finally and the space to spread out and feel like I have the resources to like really try out some new things, and then we'll see what happens. I'll let you know how it goes.
I look forward to seeing what both of you do. It's going to be great. For 440 Gallery, what we have coming up, our next show opens up September 8th. That will be Nature Nurture with Karen Gibbons in the solo space in the front. And then in the project space, we'll have a group show called Layers. That's with Joanne AC, Juliet Martin, and David Stock, who a couple of them are here. So definitely stop by for that. The opening reception for that will be September 10th from 4 to 6. So we would love to see you there.
Amanda, I forgot we have Art School One's open studios. October.
Oh, that too. All right. Well, thank you all for coming. And I hope to see you around at the gallery. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.